In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Jacksonville, Florida was a city growing fast. New homes, new jobs, and new families settling into a major military community. But hidden inside that growth was a predator. A man that blended in so well that no one suspected him, even when he stood at their front door. His name, Paul Durousseau. And according to the courts, he left a trail of victims across 2 states before anyone realized the danger. Now we're going to get into the backseat of the cab down here in Florida and go through the city of Jacksonville. This is the case of the Jacksonville Strangler. This video is made for educational and awareness purposes only. All information comes from publicly available sources. Hey, what's up, yo? It's me, I'm
Bad Ape.
And we're back
Bad Ape.
at it again.
Kick it over here, baby pop. Drop.
Okay, so we're back down in Florida. All right, so we came down from Philly into Florida. We did the Seminole Heights shooter. We went back to the Northeast and we went on the Walk of Death in Camden, New Jersey. And now we're back. And you got me. I didn't do an intro for Florida, but there's a reason for that, and I'll go into that a whole nother time. We got to really break into this case. It's wild. But anyway, I'm going to do an intro on this one. Just a few hours away from Florida reveals a very different side. The Everglades stretch endlessly across the southern part of the state. A vast river of grass where time slows down. Alligators glide through dark waters. Birds rise from sawgrass marshes, and nature operates on its own rules. It's one of the most unique ecosystems in the world, and a reminder that Florida's beauty isn't only man-made, it's ancient. And then back over here in the Cape Canaveral area, the Kennedy Space Center, along Florida's Atlantic coast. History and the future meet. At the Kennedy Space Center, visitors stand where rockets once launched humanity to the moon. It's a place of inspiration, innovation, and ambition, where Florida played a central role in changing how we see the universe. Together, these places tell Florida's story, a state where fantasy, wilderness, and exploration exist side by side. Florida's food and drink scene is as diverse as the people who call the state home. Influenced by Caribbean, Southern, Latin, and coastal traditions, every meal tells a story shaped by sunshine, sea, air, and culture. The seafood is straight from the coast. Along Florida's shores, seafood isn't just food, it's a way of life. Fresh grouper, snapper, stone crab, and shrimp are pulled from the water and served within hours. Whether it's blackened, grilled, or tucked into a sandwich, coastal cooking defines Florida's identity. And as far as the drinks go, oh man, come on now. Craft beer, rum, tropical drinks, Florida's warm climate has helped fuel a booming craft beer scene, especially cities like Tampa, Jacksonville, and Orlando. Tropical cocktails, rum punches, mojitos, and frozen drinks are just as common and often enjoyed near the water as the sun goes down. But our research don't stop here. It takes us right to the top of the state in Jacksonville, Florida. Beaumont, Texas is where Paul Durousseau was born. There isn't much to tell about his childhood because little is publicly known about his upbringing. However, that changed as records began tracking when he encountered law enforcement. His criminal history began with small burglary and petty theft, but that escalated rapidly. On December 18, 1991, and in January 21st, 1992, he was found carrying a concealed firearm in California. And more court records will detail that Paul Ernesto Durousseau had a long history of violence and instability. He drifted through life struggling with unemployment, frequent moves, and a pattern of controlling and abusive behavior towards women. Then an opportunity presented itself, and Paul enlisted in the U.S. Army in November of 1992.
What's your name, scumbag?
Sir, Private Brown, sir!
Bullshit. From now on, you're Private Snowball. Do you like that name?
Sir, yes, sir!
Well, there's one thing that you won't like, Private Snowball. They don't serve fried chicken and watermelon on a daily basis in my mess hall.
Sir, yes, sir!
Who the fuck said that? Who's the slimy little communist?
He was stationed in Germany. This is where he met Natoka. After about 18 months, they would get married in Las Vegas, 1995. In 1996, they were transferred to Fort Benning in Georgia. Then on March 13, 1997, he was arrested for kidnapping and violently assaulting a young lady. Unfortunately, he was cleared of those charges in August of that same year. Years later, prosecutors will describe this as the, quote, first sign of pattern he would refine into something far more deadly, end quote. In January of 1999, he was court-martialed, found guilty, and dishonorably discharged from the Army for being in possession of stolen goods. It was around this time that Paul and his wife Natoka moved to her hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, where they had 2 daughters, where he struggled to make ends meet for his family. For reasons unknown, Paul was unable to maintain steady work, and understandably so, the couple would constantly argue over finances and other situations. During one of those arguments, it turned from verbal to physical. He allegedly slapped her in the face and choked her by the neck. Naturally, law enforcement was called, and the police advised Natoka to file for a restraining order. In 2001, September and October, Paul spent about 50 days in prison for domestic abuse. Later on in the court testimony, his wife Natoka would later testify he would get violently angry when she would mention divorce in their heated arguments. Neighbors and friends described him as, quote, lewd womanizer, end quote. He often asked young women when they planned to, quote, make flicks, end quote, with him. Witnesses recall him trying to hit on and pick up girls as young as 13. Paul continued bouncing from job to job until 2001, and despite being convicted of a felony, he was able to secure a job as a bus driver and an animal control worker. Then in 2003, he was able to secure a position as a taxi cab driver at the Gator City Taxi Company in Jacksonville, Florida. The company had severely dropped the ball. They failed to run a background check on Paul, and it's believed this is how he first came into contact with some of his victims. Damn. Unfortunately, Jacksonville isn't where the crime spree began. That's where it ended. This was long before the city realized they were being hunted. Now that we established that, let's go back. Remember when Paul was in Georgia? You know, stationed in Fort Benning. Well, shortly after he was acquitted of that violent assault case, on September 7th, 1997, the nude remains of 26-year-old Tracy Harbisham were found. She was last seen at a party and had been missing for 48 hours. By the time she had been discovered, she had been violently assaulted and strangled with a cord. Paul Durousseau was not a person of interest in this crime, but as time pressed on, his DNA would later tie him to the scene, and he would also confess to taking the life of Harbisham after his eventual arrest. The first confirmed crime that was tied to Paul was in 1999 when 25-year-old Teresa Mack remains were found in her Jacksonville apartment. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle that neighbors heard, only silence. Investigators didn't know yet that Paul Durousseau had already begun perfecting a method that relied on deception, sudden violence, and overwhelming force. By 2002, the killings intensified. The bodies of young women began appearing across the city. Some were found near wooded areas, others discarded near roadsides or in abandoned buildings. Several were pregnant. All showed signs of strangulation. The signature, prosecutors would later argue, reflected Durousseau's need for control. And as we already went over the first confirmed kill linked to Paul Durousseau, he violently assaulted and took the life of Teresa Mack in her apartment. Witnesses saw him leave her place with a television, and in 2001, he was arrested for violently assaulting a young woman in Jacksonville. He spent 30 days in lockup and received 2 years probation. And in 2002, on December 17th, 18-year-old Nicole Williams was reported missing. 2 days later, her remains were found at the bottom of a ditch in Jacksonville. She was wrapped in a blue blanket. Witnesses would later detail that the young and expecting mother, Nicole Williams, was last seen getting into a cab resembling the ones used at the Gator City Cab Company. This minor detail placed Paul at the scene and as a person of interest. Weeks later, Quinshondra Williams disappeared. After a routine appointment, her remains were discovered off a rural roadway. Then came the discovery of Jashawn Richardson, 24, found inside an abandoned home. Another senseless life stolen by a man the community trusted. All the while, Durousseau continued wearing many masks: a husband, a father, a cab driver, a security guard, a transporter for women attending appointments. He used his job to move freely between communities, approaching women who were alone, vulnerable, or simply trying to get through their day. And then another gruesome discovery. 19-year-old Nakia Kilpatrick hadn't been seen nor heard from for several days, so her family went to her apartment to check in on her. Nothing could have prepared the family for what they walked into. The children were upset, crying. They found the 19-year-old's remains in her bedroom. She had been violently assaulted. Coroners were able to determine her life was taken by strangulation with a cord just 2 days before. Her 2 boys, at the time 11 months and 2 years old, were alive but malnourished. Kilpatrick was also approximately 6 months pregnant at the time her life was taken. As the city searched for answers, Durousseau continued to move through Jacksonville unnoticed. He visited grocery stores, drove through neighborhoods, and returned home each night as if nothing happened. His neighbors saw a quiet man. His victims saw him only in their final moments. But The spree was unraveling. In 2003, a forensic breakthrough changed everything. DNA recovered from the crime scene matched samples taken from Paul Durousseau during a previous arrest. Suddenly, investigators saw the connections, the transportation routes, the locations, the identical method of killings. The elusive shadow that once stalked the streets now has a name, and that name is Paul Durousseau. And it won't be long now. But wait, hold up. Before they close in, guess what, fam? Another gruesome discovery. January 9th of the same year, 20-year-old nurse assistant Shawanda Denise McAllister, who was also pregnant at the time she was departed. She was violently assaulted, and the coroner confirmed the method of her departure, death by strangulation in her Jacksonville apartment. The crime scene was almost identical to that of Nakia Kilpatrick. Detectives were able to determine that Nakia Kilpatrick, her life was taken on Durousseau's first day of driving a cab for Gator City Taxi. Her remains were found the following day. The next two victims were 17-year-old Giovanna Jefferson and 19-year-old Sarita Cohen. Their remains were found on February 5th, close to each other and in a ditch next to a construction site on New Kings Road in Jacksonville. The coroner was able to determine that Jefferson's life was taken around January 20th, and Cohen's life was taken about 10 days later. Witnesses recounted seeing the two with a taxi driver, fitting Paul Durousseau's description on the night they disappeared. For years, the streets of Jacksonville, Florida carried unanswered questions. Bodies have been found, lives have been stolen, and the man responsible had walked freely among neighbors, co-workers, and strangers, never drawing the attention, never raising alarm. That changed in the summer of 2003, though. Behind closed doors, the DNA recovered from multiple crime scenes, evidence preserved for years, matched one single name, Paul Ernesto Durousseau. The confirmation set everything in motion. On July 23rd, 2003, law enforcement officers prepared for an arrest that had been years in the making. There would be no sirens, no dramatic chase, no public warning. Investigators knew exactly who they were dealing with. They intended to end his freedom quietly and decisively. Durousseau was taken into custody in Jacksonville, Florida without resistance. According to court records, he did not attempt to flee. He didn't argue. He didn't even ask why he was being arrested, as if he knew the moment had finally come. Officers later described the arrest as, quote, calm, almost unsettling in its stillness, end quote. The man, suspected of multiple heinous crimes that resulted in taking the lives of several women across 2 states, showed no visible signs of emotion as the handcuffs were secured. He was arrested and charged 5 counts of murder. For the families of the victim, the moment brought a mix of relief and grief. Relief that the violence had finally stopped. Grief that justice, no matter how long delayed, could never undo what had been taken from them. As Durousseau was transported from one scene, detectives connected the final pieces, employment records, transportation routes, witness statements, and the DNA evidence that sealed his fate. Undeniable. The shadow that once haunted Jacksonville, it had a face, but they didn't know the name. Now it has a name and a case number. In the courtroom, prosecutors described Paul Durousseau as a man who walked through Jacksonville unnoticed, hiding in plain sight. He looked like a neighbor, a co-worker, a driver, a husband. But court documents paint a different picture. A man who used trust as a weapon, opportunity as a doorway, and strangulation as his signature, end quote. All of his victims were young, single, African-American women and daughters, sisters, and mothers-to-be. Young women trying to survive and trying to build a future, and in some cases, simply trying to get an appointment. Their stories stand as a reminder of how vulnerability can be exploited by someone determined to prey on it. Prosecutors would later say the arrest marked the end of a calculated crime spree built on trust and opportunity. For investigators, it was simpler. It was the moment the hunt ended. The courtroom would later hear the full scope of his crimes. 6 women in Florida, 1 woman in Georgia, 7 lives broken, a single man who preyed on trust and vulnerability. Prosecutors described him as a, quote, cold and deliberate predator, end quote. A man who stalked opportunity with the precision of someone who knew exactly how to avoid detection. The judge agreed. As the case echoed around the world, all of his victims were young, single African-American women. German authorities suspect Paul Ernesto Durousseau may have killed several local women when he was stationed there in the army during the early 1990s. As Durousseau's ploy is to gain the trust of his victims, enter the home, tie their hands, assault them, and take their life by strangulation. On December 13, 2007, he was sentenced to have a date with the needle, lethal injection. Even now, his story lingers in Jacksonville's memory, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look just like everyone else.
Daily New tonight at 5, a convicted killer and an accused serial killer will spend the rest of his life in prison. Paul Durousseau's death sentence was overturned today. He was charged with killing 5 women. He was only convicted of 1 killing that happened in 1999.
And on that note, get him out of here. Durousseau's past of violence stretched across years and state lines. And while he awaits execution on Florida's death row, the families of his victims continue to carry the weight of the losses he left behind. Their pursuit of justice ensured that he would never walk free again.
Oh no!
Okay, it's about that time. Subscribe, like, comment, share. You know the drill. And thank you for riding with
Bad Ape.
And until we see you on the next one.
Bad Ape.